In 2012, more than 60,000 Orthodox Jews gathered in not one, but two sports stadiums in New York. Yet it wasn't for a sporting event. Instead, they assembled to confront the challenges presented by the internet, specifically within Orthodox Jewish communities, igniting a conversation that continues to this very day. In this video, we'll explore the two approaches to this issue, much like the movie The Matrix, where we'll explore the merit of each pill or decision that Orthodox Jews had to make regarding the internet as they navigate the digital age. Enter the Asifa, a monumental gathering orchestrated by an organization known as Ichad HaKehilos L'Toyer HaMachane, a name that translates to the Union of Congregations for the Purity of the Camp. This grand event had its sights on the ultra-Orthodox, Hasidic, and Yeshivish communities, with prominent rabbis from Brooklyn, upstate New York, and Lakewood promoting the cause. Strangely, it appeared that the modern Orthodox rabbis didn't snag an invite, but they too recognized the internet's challenges, but with their own take on the solution. Now imagine the stage is set, the language buzzing in Yiddish as various speakers take the podium. Among them, one voice stood out, Rabbi Ephraim Waxman, a Monsey, New York rabbi who would steal the show with his remarks. He kicked things off by shedding light on the fundamental issue that Orthodox Jews grapple with concerning the internet.
What is the nisayon of technology? Of course, we all know the internet, even with a filter, is a minefield of immorality. In Veret from the Kvira and the Batola, the Lashon Hara, the Bezoyan Talmidei Chachamim that has already taken hold of the minds and hearts of our young and our not so young.
But he also mentioned that the issue with the internet isn't just on the surface with mature content or wasting time, but a deeper issue of the dangers of social media addiction and depression.
Even secular educators and psychologists have been decrying the children who are being turned into click vegetables. People say the Gedolim don't understand the internet. They don't know what it's about. It may be true. But they understand life. They understand the subtleties and the trends. And they understand that the internet, the mindset is the opposite of Kedusha. The instant gratification leaves no room for perseverance, for endurance, for coping.
Rabbi Waxman proceeded to explain that he doesn't buy the argument that the internet is ubiquitous and here to stay. Since a generation prior, a lot of people had televisions in their homes, but were able to get rid of it and would only encounter it when, say, they went to their grandparents' house.
Even if chas v'shalom, we've already lost the 20 to 35-year-olds, and I don't believe it's so. But we don't have to lose the 0 to 20s. We can put a stop to it now. I've seen with my own eyes people giving children of 11 years old Blackberries and iPhones and iPods. Are they out of their minds? What do they think? My child is Heilig. Do you remember what it was to be a child? I tell you, when I was 11 years old, if somebody would have given me such a machine, in 20 seconds, I would have been trying to explore everything on that machine. We can no longer retreat. Tonight we draw the demarcation line in the sand, and from now on we're going forward.
Whoa. I mean, whatever you think of this man, he clearly knows how to rally up a stadium full of Jews. I mean, you could feel his passion in your bones. But his very strong feelings on the matter are important because they signify the approach that he and like-minded rabbis take towards dealing with the issues of the internet. Because in their eyes, this is such a dangerous issue, there's simply no compromise, and we need to draw a line in the sand and simply not cross it. As Rabbi Waxman explained, because of how intense this challenge is, we need to go to the other extreme and avoid the internet entirely, except maybe in the most necessary cases like that of work.
Omnom bisman kozeh, in a time like this, ein derech acheres rak lahachzik b'tzei ha'achroin shel tzad ha'toiv. You have to go to the ultimate, the furthest tzad ha'toiv. Every person has to know, when we're faced with such a decision, you're faced with a machine, you're holding it in your hands, it represents thousands and thousands of hours of the rest of your life. What are you going to choose? Ubocharto b'chayim, yelech litzdodim. Let us not look for compromise.
This sentiment was not just spoken from rabbis like Waxman, but also from others who promoted the event, like the Skalena Rebbe from Borough Park and Rabbi Matisyahu Solomon from Lakewood, who echoed the sentiment that all Jews who consider themselves Orthodox were obligated to stay as far away from the internet as possible. In fact, one of the speakers, Reb Shmuel Wosner, who is a major rabbinic authority in Israel, phoned into the event and spoke in Yiddish, where he called on the leaders of Jewish day schools that were present to deny access to students whose families have internet access at home, since that one student can corrupt the entire organization.
Dann holt es am Moisnes, dann holt es a Yeshivas, auf die Rosh Yeshivas, auf die Malbitze Teure, auf Choiv Gudel, a Isse Guma, auf Moisnes Gereden, sie tun nicht reinnehmen, a Talmud von der Mischbuche, wo sie macht sich der Internet bei Isse.
In the years that followed, numerous Orthodox schools and yeshivas implemented this policy, requiring individuals to sign declarations affirming the absence of internet in their homes. Yet, as we all understand, not everyone adhered to this commitment truthfully. Over time, some educational institutions recognized the unavoidable nature of the internet and its prevalence in modern life. Consequently, they formed partnerships with an organization known as Technology Awareness Group, or TAG. This collaboration aimed to strike a balance, permitting students to use mobile devices while imposing restrictions on specific apps, such as social media, and implementing filters to block mature and otherwise inappropriate content from the internet. But there's one major issue with all of this that we have not yet addressed, and that is a child who's determined to get access to the internet will definitely figure out ways to achieve it, whether it's getting around the filter on their device or going somewhere with unfiltered internet like the library, or borrowing someone's device, or even just buying a new device in secret. And so even if you agree that all the measures we just mentioned are sound and that religious communities should avoid the internet entirely and schools should enforce really strict policies, there's still this issue of how to mitigate the negative effects of the internet on children when the adults are not around. Before we start discussing the different approaches to the internet by Orthodox communities, we should get the basics out of the way and explain what the internet actually is. The term internet originates from interconnected networks, a system of computers designed for communication and information exchange. Initially developed for military and academic purposes, by the 1980s, it evolved to enable businesses to share electronic messages, emails, and introduce the World Wide Web with clickable links and media-filled pages. Cue the dot-com boom, propelling the internet to new heights, birthing giants like Google and Amazon. Fast forward to the late 2000s, and mobile technology takes center stage, propelling the internet from business tool to a universal phenomenon. Think social media, the streaming revolution, and smart homes seamlessly becoming part of our daily lives. Now, like any technology shift, it ends up being a mixed bag. The internet promised faster connections and enhanced efficiency, granting us access to the world's information via Google and simplifying travel through apps like Uber. It fostered connections, spread positivity, even reuniting lost relatives. Plus, it became a potent tool for rallying support for social causes, crowdfunding, and even finding potential organ donors. However, despite the altruistic intentions, the internet can definitely have a negative side. From a religious standpoint, a significant critique is its hosting of various forms of media, including adult content. Yet, a deeper concern lies in the internet's potential for addiction, specifically through mobile devices. This addiction prevents individuals from being fully present in their immediate surroundings, be it with family, during prayer in shul, or in the course of their daily activities, as their attention becomes consumed by their phones. Illustrating this point, in 2012, Lipa Schmelzer released a song titled "Hang Up the Phone," portraying scenarios where people are mentally absent from their lives, merely reacting to notifications.
I'm going to a wedding, the entire hall is squawking, everyone is phoning, to the wall I'm talking, my friends with his Bluetooth, when together we are walking. Hey, hello please, can you hang up that phone?
Now, although it might be tempting to just dismiss the notion that phones are addictive or that high doses of screen time are bad for you, it's just another boomer conspiracy theory. Unfortunately for you, there's actually science to back this up. For example, the psychiatrist Anna Lemke, who is an expert in addiction, points out that high doses of screen time can create a dopamine high, which is compensated with a real low beneath normal baseline, and that can be felt as a state of depression.
And that after a while, we can kind of get stuck in that dopamine deficit state. And that usually manifests not as, oh man, I'm addicted to this thing. What it manifests as is a very kind of a subtle and pervasive dissatisfaction with our lives.
Furthermore, the psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who has been raising awareness about this issue, explains that the research shows that there's been a huge increase in depression, anxiety, and self-harm in young people. And this seems to have started with the onset of mobile social media becoming available to children in Gen Z.
What's happening is that rates of depression and anxiety were fairly stable from the 90s through the early 2000s. And what you see is that the rate for boys is around 5%. And then around 2011, it starts going up, and now it's around 7%, which is actually a somewhat substantial increase. The girls' rate is higher, but it was stable from 2000, or at least in that graph, from 2005 through 2010. And then right around 2011, 2012, it starts going up, and it goes way up to the point where it goes up from about 12% to now about 20% of American teenage girls have had a major depressive episode in the last year, 1 in 5.
What's the cause?
We don't know for sure, but the leading candidate and the timing, look at that timing, is social media. So if you look at what happened in this country and all around the world, Facebook opens up to the world in 2006. You don't have to be a college student, but very few teenagers have a Facebook account in 2006. 2007, the iPhone comes out, but it's very expensive and very few teenagers have one. By 2010, 2011, around half of American teenagers have an iPhone or Samsung. They have a smartphone, and they have access to social media in middle school. And that's what I think is the main cause of this.
But there's actually a reason for all of this. As they say, this is a feature and not a bug. In the documentary, The Social Dilemma, they interview a bunch of tech executives who are responsible for the creation of all the different apps that we use today. And they explain that it's actually in the tech company's best interest to hold your attention for as long as possible, since they can monetize that viewership, usually through advertisements.
So, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, companies like this, their business model is to keep people engaged on the screen.
Let's figure out how to get as much of this person's attention as we possibly can. How much time can we get you to spend? How much of your life can we get you to give to us?
In fact, the method that these companies use to hold your attention, called persuasive technology, preys upon our desire to get a dopamine hit and keeps us coming back to our phones. But it's the same exact desire that casinos will prey on in order to raise their own profits.
Persuasive technology is just sort of design intentionally applied to the extreme, where we really want to modify someone's behavior. We want them to take this action. We want them to keep doing this with their finger.
You pull down and you refresh, it's going to be a new thing at the top. Pull down and refresh again, it's new. Every single time, which in psychology we call a positive intermittent reinforcement.
So you don't know when you're going to get it, and you don't know if you're going to get something, which operates just like the slot machines in Vegas. It's not enough that you use the product consciously. I want to dig down deeper into the brainstem and implant inside of you an unconscious habit so that you are being programmed at a deeper level. You don't even realize it.
Then the pandemic struck, and suddenly governments were like, hey, chill at home, or else. As staying home became the norm, I couldn't help but reflect on the fact that this was only possible because we had smartphones and developed apps ingrained into our daily lives. And this enabled us to shelter in place during the 2020 lockdowns. Imagine if we still had 2001 technology. Pulling off these lockdowns would have been impossible. We'd all feel stranded on a deserted island. The tech has become so ubiquitous now that it simply couldn't be avoided, but rather we needed strategies to navigate it effectively. What this period showed us was that by the year 2020, video calls, social media, and streaming have become so universal, it enabled governments to enact orders based on their reliance on it.
Today, the World Health Organization officially announced that this is a global pandemic.
Fast-breaking developments in the coronavirus emergency in the U.S.
Your internet has to continue to work.
The pandemic spotlighted that pure isolation isn't practical, that staying cut off from the world isn't a smart strategy, since it leaves people unprepared for moments like stay at home for 2 weeks to slow the spread. During this time, people, like myself, began to realize that the internet has both positive and negative aspects, and it is also universal to many of us. And so, maybe, just maybe, there's a way to make technology work for us without losing who we are.
Imagine, if you will, sitting down to your morning coffee, turning on your home computer to read the day's newspaper. Well, it's not as far-fetched as it may seem.
The term inoculation originates from the medical world, referring to developing immunity to a disease. Interestingly, it's a concept that was not discussed at the Asifa. In the medical context, immunity means the ability to resist getting a disease, while in the realm of the internet, it means effectively navigating the web for growth while avoiding potential harm. My introduction to the term inoculation in the context of the internet was through a clip of Ben Shapiro, a renowned political commentator and Orthodox Jew who was being interviewed for a Jewish podcast. The discussion revolved around how he handles the issue of the internet with his children, especially given his status as a public figure.
As they get older, it's going to have to be an inoculation process. And this is the way that I'd talk about, teaching kids, is that it's an inoculation because just like an inoculation is taking a less severe strain of a particular disease and then allowing your body to build up resistance to it, I think that you can't overwhelm your kids with the ugliness that's out there. You can have open discussions with the kids about why the ugliness that's out there is out there and why it's wrong. I think it's really important to do that because otherwise they get hit with a disease that they have no immune system for.
Shapiro's perspective resonates with the idea articulated by a Russian author that men are still men and not the keys of a piano, which means, despite regulations, there's a limit to the control one can exert on an individual, especially when they're determined. To address concerns about the internet exposure for children, particularly regarding content and screen time, the key lies in appealing to individual responsibility and providing a realistic understanding of both the positive and the negative aspects of the internet.
Now, the isolationist would counter this approach and say that yes, although everyone decides what happens in their own house, and that there are some children that will be determined to get access, as a community, Orthodox Jews need to have a unified response, and that is to avoid the internet entirely. In fact, in his remarks, Rabbi Waxman makes this point.
So before someone thinks that I can do what I like, one must remember he cannot repudiate 40,000 Yidden who are mekabel haskomas and hoyroes g'doylei hador with ahava and with yira.
The inoculation side, as we'll call it, will respond back and say that ignorance of the internet is not the same as innocence, and that inadequate preparation and support regarding the internet can really set children up for failure. In fact, in that very same interview, Ben Shapiro says as much.
And I think this is the biggest mistake that the educational community has in the Orthodox community, is that there's this idea that if you just bubble everybody off, because understandable, you're trying to keep everybody safe. You bubble everybody off. This is particularly true for high school students. When you're talking about like fourth graders, no, you have to bubble them off. But when you get to kids who are 13, 15, 16 years old, and they're going to be engaging with the world because technology is just too ubiquitous and there's no way to avoid it, then avoiding these conversations and also avoiding saying hard things in these conversations is a huge mistake.
But it's not just Ben Shapiro who's echoing this sentiment. Jonathan Haidt, whom we discussed earlier regarding the internet's dangers, emphasizes that we cannot adapt a purely isolationist stance. He argues that it's actually beneficial to assist children in their growth by exposing them to challenges, and the goal is not only to make them resilient in the face of challenges, but to also lead their own lives by becoming stronger and more wise. He refers to this concept as being anti-fragile, a term he borrowed from others, signifying the ability to become stronger in the face of adversity.
What's the word for things that do get better when you knock them over? And the classic example is the immune system. So the immune system is an incomplete system. It's a miracle of evolution that we have this system for making, antibodies. But it doesn't know exactly what to be reactive to. That has to be set by childhood experience. And so if you keep your kids in a bubble and you use bacterial wipes and you don't let them be exposed to bacteria, you're crippling the system. The system has to get knocked over. It has to get challenged, threatened. It has to learn how to expand its abilities. So as kids live in a safer and safer world, they also have the internet, which is going to expose them to virtual insults forever and ever. So how are we going to raise kids to be maximally effective in this new 21st century world, which is physically very safe, but virtually unsafe? And I think the key idea that we need to put on the table here, and that I think everybody who works with kids needs to keep in mind every day, is anti-fragility.
And at the very end of the documentary, The Social Dilemma, Haidt mentioned the strategy that helps parents to teach and negotiate with children regarding the internet.
I've worked out what I think are 3 simple rules that make life a lot easier for families and that are justified by the research. So the first rule is all devices out of the bedroom at a fixed time every night. Whatever the time is, half an hour before bedtime, all devices out. Second rule is no social media until high school. Personally, I think the age should be 16. Middle school is already hard enough. Keep it out until high school. And the third rule is work out a time budget with your kid. And if you talk with them and say, well, how many hours a day do you want to spend on your device? What do you think is a good amount? They'll often say something pretty reasonable.
Now, I'm not a parenting expert, and you shouldn't take all your life advice from documentaries, but my point is that there is more than one approach to dealing with the challenges of the internet. But there's actually a deeper level to this conversation that we haven't yet mentioned, which isn't about the content or the apps, but rather about the nature of the internet itself.
See danger in the internet?
100%.
What is the danger in the internet?
Danger is sometimes you could be typing things and not being realize what you're doing exactly.
The Asifa, or the ingathering of Jews, took place in May of 2012, which is right before the holiday of Shavuos. This holiday commemorates the moment in Jewish history where God revealed himself on Mount Sinai and gave the Jewish people the Torah. And this theme was not missed by the organizer and speakers, who mentioned that the internet wasn't simply dangerous because of adult content or overused screen time, but rather because it threatened the Jewish religion itself. In fact, a prominent Orthodox rabbi in Israel, Reb Aaron Leib Steinman, went so far as to refer to the internet as the greatest corrupter and inciter of our generation. Rabbi Waxman, in his remarks, mentioned this point as well, listing some of the previous corruptors.
Throughout history, we were confronted by many such challenges. The times of Tanakh, of Chazal, later in history, communism, Haskalah, Zionism, and we paid a very heavy price. The Gedolim tell us that we are at such a juncture in our history. And your resolve, your strength, your decisiveness at this gathering will determine what Yiddishkeit will look like in a few years from now. If you want your children and your grandchildren to be with the Rebbeinu Shalom, Elah, you must rally around the guidance and the hadrach of the Gedolei Hador.
As we mentioned earlier, the internet revolutionized how information was transmitted, progressing from oral transmission to the written word, printing, and recording sound. The internet represents the next logical step in the advancement of information technology. And this is such a crucial point to understand the core of the two approaches of the internet that we should hear from the historian Henry Abramson.
There are about 4 key moments in Jewish history where we had kind of an inflection point that related to communication technology. The period when we went from orality to manuscript, right, in times of Yehuda Nasi, when we went from just having to be physically with a rabbi to learn the Torah, and then you would have it, to the point where you actually had text written down. And that tremendously expanded the survivability of Judaism because it made it portable. And it was controversial, but extremely efficacious at preserving Jewish identity. Then we had another major moment when Gutenberg invented the printing press. Jews were early adopters of that technology. They loved it. In fact, there's some suggestions that the first movable type may have been in Hebrew rather than in German Roman letters. And all of a sudden, you could take hugely expensive, difficult to produce manuscripts, and you could produce much cheaper books, right? Vastly expanding the readership, literacy, and allowing a whole new generation of Jews to appreciate their Yiddishkeit rather than disappearing into assimilation, conversion, and so on. And the next big moment, of course, is the internet. Since the mid-90s, all of a sudden, we have this incredible possibility to reach so many people by going digital, and you're participating in that, and we're doing that right now. We are taking advantage of this Gutenberg moment to hopefully reach a much larger group of Jews with the message of why you should connect.
This sentiment expressed by Abramson can best be summed up by a tweet I saw, which said, "Was there an Asifa when Gutenberg invented the printing press?" Well, actually, yes. Well, not literally. Okay, I'm gonna let Dr. Abramson continue to explain.
And those complaints were raised with printing as well. People were saying, oh my gosh, if you can print things so cheaply, there's going to be so much garbage on the streets. And there was, you know, but nevertheless, we still appreciated books. And, you know, the cream rises to the top. We save those books that are still extremely valuable. And hopefully they'll save these podcasts because they're so extremely valuable.
Of course, the isolationist would disagree with this viewpoint that the internet is just another information technology, since the dangers of corrupting Yiddishkeit definitely outweigh the benefits. And besides the issues you've already mentioned, there's this new issue of corrupting an entire generation with misinformation. And in his speech, Rabbi Waxman made this point very clear.
The internet is no longer a tool or a device. The problems are no longer just that it's an easier or quicker way for someone to access inappropriate material. Today, the internet is a culture. It's a psychology. It's a way of life. It's changing who we are. You can see it in the ebbing of the light and the vacant eyes of the Ingolite, of the jittery inattentiveness of our children, and the flippant and callous language and attitudes, the cynicism, the late sonis. People are changing. They become someone else.
Whether you're on the right or left wing, politically or religiously, I think we can all agree that the internet can definitely spread misinformation. In fact, in the documentary The Social Dilemma, the tech executives mentioned that this is also another feature of their system, since clickbaity misinformation can actually drive engagement on their platforms.
We've created a system that biases towards false information. Not because we want to, but because false information makes the companies more money than the truth. The truth is boring.
It's a disinformation for profit business model. You make money the more you allow unregulated messages to reach anyone for the best price.
But again, this is where the side of inoculation would say that it's our responsibility to educate students how to use the internet properly and sort out what is valid and what isn't, as opposed to strictly avoiding it, as Abramson in that very same interview makes clear.
So I like to think of this as a difference between knowledge and wisdom. And I think that my generation has a deep responsibility to try and provide, as weak as we are, some measure of wisdom to younger people so they understand properly that the internet appears flat, like everything is all equal, but it's not at all flat. There are, huge mountains of value that stand right beside the cesspools of dangerous misinformation.
Wow.
And you have to figure out, how am I going to find the mountain to climb? I don't even know what it looks like.
With every revolution in information technology comes the opportunity for significant learning and connection, but also the risk of corruption and misinformation. The isolationist approach advocates avoiding the internet to prevent potential problems, but also misses out on the potential goodness the internet can foster. On the other hand, the inoculation perspective argues that it's our responsibility to use the internet wisely, educating ourselves and our children on how to navigate it within the proper boundaries without fearing information technology for its own sake. To further make this point, let's hear from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who had this to say when asked about the internet back in 2010.
So I do see that every time we create a problem for ourselves, the Almighty creates a solution. And right now, He sent us the internet. He sent us YouTube. I mean, Judaism began with a revolution in information technology. Did you know that? We were the first people to use the alphabet. The world's first alphabet discovered by a British anthropologist called Flinders Petrie in 1903 in the Sinai Desert, is called Proto-Semitic, and it is the world's first alphabet. When you reduce all those signs, cuneiform in Mesopotamia, hieroglyphics in Egypt, of which there are hundreds, and most people would never learn them, but when you reduced all of that to 22 signs, that's an alphabet, then everyone can link in. And so the invention of the alphabet made possible the book, which made possible the people of the book. So if Judaism was born in a revolution in information technology, I tend to look at every information technology breakthrough as a sign from heaven, telling us, communicate more widely and forget about all those walls that separate Jew from Jew.
Do you want to know what it is? Today, more than a decade post Asifa, numerous organizations collaborate with schools to implement filters and monitor internet usage on students' phones. Additional initiatives focus on supporting students in navigating challenges relating to avoiding adult content and managing internet addiction. As we've explored, two clear perspectives on the internet emerge. One regards it as a space only for inappropriate and harmful content, advocating strict avoidance, while the other acknowledges the existence of such elements but promotes education and resources to foster resilience and anti-fragility. As we take a few steps back from this discussion, the decision between the two approaches reminds me of a moment from the movie The Matrix, which has become quite an overused metaphor on the internet, so allow me to continue in that tradition. In the scene where Morpheus offers Neo 2 pills, one of them is blue, which will allow Neo to go back to sleep and be unaware of the challenges of the world around him, but rendering him unable to fix it. The red pill, on the other hand, allows Neo to see things the way they are, which will come with tremendous challenges, but in the end is worth it because it allows Neo to be victorious. But which school of thought do you subscribe to? Do you believe that the challenges of the internet means that it should be best avoided or should be faced head on? But ultimately, that choice is yours. So, which pill will you choose?